great time so far. We would now begin with our third panel discussion on the hot topic M&A and Digitalization. Conrad F. Titers will be moderating the panel. Our guest speakers for this panel discussion are Dominic Krippman, Galena Wallanitz, Giuseppe Caltabiano, and Dharmendra Singh. Over to you, Conrad.
Thank you very much, and welcome again from our side. We have a fantastic panel discussion. We are very well prepared, and thank you very much for staying with us today. So, quick introduction to myself. I'm Conrad Titers, based in Germany since 2007 in M&A, and I'm the growth leader in our organization as far as our M&A business is concerned. Galena, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Conrad, and I'm so happy to be part of this panel. My name is Galena Wallanitz. I'm Managing Director at Virtus Partners. It is a small boutique firm focusing on accounting and finance and post-merger integration activities, supporting clients in those areas. I have about 25 years of experience integrating large and small companies, bringing companies into small corporations, into large. So a lot of scars to show, and hoping to share that experience with you all.
Thank you. Dominic, do you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. And also from my side, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Dominic Krippman. I'm a managing director within Accenture, which is a global technology organization from consulting through implementations, through operations. And I'm leading our what we call tech M&A capability globally. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion in this group.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dominic. Vicky, do you want to continue?
Sounds great. Thank you, Conrad. I'll look forward to the discussion as well. So I currently am running our transaction advisory services group at a consulting firm called RGP. And my focus is primarily on the integration separation line. And for myself, I'm actually one of those who just loves the chaos of work in M&A and have actually just spent my time across, honestly, the entire deal continuum. So I've tried everything from the front end inorganic strategy to valuation, diligence, and for the past decade or so, primarily focused on just tackling the integration aspects, separation aspects, and just helping clients drive value.
Yeah, you've seen it all, Vicky, right? So thank you very much for that. And now, last but not least, Giuseppe, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, Conrad, thank you for having me. Thank you, Mergerware. I think I will give a different perspective, meaning I'm not daily involved with M&A activities, but I'm a marketer. I'm director of marketing at Rock Content, which is a startup in the field of content marketing. I teach marketing and branding at General Assembly here in London, where I live. And I've been involved in a few acquisitions and large corporations, the last one, Schneider Electric, a few years ago. And that's my experience. And this is something that I will tell you later today.
Excellent. So thank you very much. So as you all know, it's this session is all about technology and the role of technology and digital, the new normal that we have arrived at. And we decided to have a discussion on that, on the impact on M&A. Is it going to be faster? Is it going to be better? Does it support due diligence, the whole of the life cycle of a transaction, including post-merger integration? You're going to hear a couple of examples that you guys, the panel members, lived through. And with this, Dominic, I have the key kind of icebreaker question for you. Have you seen digital deal making on the rise? That's the opening question in your direction.
That's a very broad question, but good to start with that one, and happy for the rest to chip in. I mean, Yes, of course. Yeah, I have seen that over the last, I would say, three years, maybe 5 years. But what I have seen lately with the pandemic that we are gratefully coming out of as we speak is that it has actually ignited the way digital technologies are being applied to the M&A process. Because, and I was actually quite surprised why it was triggered. It was mostly triggered with my clients because resources on M&A deals have been very, very scarce because a lot of transactions have been approved pre-pandemic, then have been put on hold, and out of a sudden it's actually bursting, right? So many transactions that need to be executed, and out of a sudden companies like ourselves or my colleagues here on the call, we realize we don't have that many resources that actually can support those deal and transactions to be executed. And out of a sudden you ask yourself, what could be an alternative? And very, very quickly you come to digital technologies, automation, standardization. All of these things make us less important or less, critical for a process because humans can be amended by those technologies. And therefore I've seen digital very much on the rise throughout the last year, where processes are being standardized, automated. AI is coming into play when we're talking VDR stories, due diligence, target screening. All of these things are getting augmented by digital technologies.
Yeah, no, that's true. And also looking at talent in the organization, there's also kind of a movement going on to scan talent digitally. That is probably coming on top. So any other comments in this direction from the team?
I will just kind of jump in. I think, Dominic, you make a great point too with just how humans are really being amended by the technology. Because I think a lot of what this is doing too is, and I think all of us on this panel and those listening in have been part of those manual processes of updating status reports and PowerPoints and Excel. And this has really allowed us to be more efficient and really starting to become more strategic. From a consulting perspective or internally at the client, you can now focus your time not on some of that administrative updating, but also just how do we really drive a value and really kind of execute. So it certainly is becoming a good game changer in many ways.
True. So thank you very much, Vicky.
And Konrad, maybe to amend, and thanks, Vicky, for that point, because it triggers my view also on data. There is so much data nowadays available. When you look at those VDRs and in a deal transaction, and that data needs to be analyzed, and there, crawling tools or other AI-empowered toolings are of great help because they basically derive investment hypotheses out of it, which we as human beings would normally just not be able to do in such small period of time that the due diligence always has, right? So that's another thing that Vicky, I think, was just going through my head when you were raising that point.
Yeah.
So conclusion, Vicky and Dominic, digital is on the rise, correct?
It is.
Summarize that in that way. That's great. And by the way, to all of the participants in the audience, please feel free to ask questions or put comments in the chat functionality. I'm going to track those and we'll bring them up during the conversation. Thank you very much for that. So, Vicky, you were just talking about your perspective on the earlier question. So now let's get a little bit closer to the overall M&A process as such.
Yeah.
Which parts of the M&A process do you see at the moment being digitalized, where digital pops up every now and then, is being utilized?
Yeah. I'm going to bring up something that's unique because, as we all know, we've certainly seen things out there from the pipelining to sort of the diligence management and also the integration management. But one area where I'm starting to see a little bit of and some interest in too is really how do we digitize and create an experience for the acquired employees as well? Because some of the things we're hearing is, especially if you're a strategic buyer, you're up against a lot of private investors, so like the private equity firms. And how do you really differentiate yourself? So what we're hearing with some of the serial acquirers is, how do we kind of become that buyer of choice? How do we kind of create an environment for these employees to really be onboarded and start feeling as part of, the new company? And especially, I think with the COVID going on and a lot more of the hybrid workforce, you don't have that advantage of really being in the office. So how do we now kind of take it to another level in terms of, having these employees feel like they're part of the company? How do you kind of bring them in? So we are seeing a little bit too of how do we digitize that aspect of it? And it really does become a lot of part of, the change management, the cultural, but more importantly too, it's, the innovation now of really the new way that we're all working as well.
Makes perfectly sense. And I think this is a bridgehead into you, Giuseppe, to talk about your case studies, what you have been experiencing, what you have been seeing.
Right, and I do have in front of me a very recent report from DataSite, the new state of M&A, where the majority of practitioners believe that there are some areas where M&A process cannot be entirely automated, which is interesting because they mention strategy, negotiation, and deal preparation, which basically leave us with all the rest, which is due diligence, post-merger integration, which is the field where I've been, I had more experience in the past, sourcing, closing eventually. Now, what I think it is interesting about technology and the different phases is technically technology can help, across the full M&A cycle of value creation. There are so many different tools, and if we think about new tools like software as a service tools, they, instead of cloning existing systems, whenever you go with a deal, you can entirely deploy new cloud-based systems that will work for both the two different parts. If we want to list some of the examples of how technology and digital tools can help across the different stages of the M&A, I may mention, for instance, advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, especially in deal sourcing process. I think this was already mentioned by Dominic, and they can accelerate due diligence, but also data management and automation-based tool that can enable faster evaluation of a target performance, just to give an example. Finally, post-merger integration. I remember I've been using collaboration tool. One of the problems we had were, collaboration, of course, integration of processes, culture, workforce. All these can be easily automated and make it faster by technology. And finally, if we think about project management tools across the full due diligence, across the full M&A life cycle, this can be game-changing technology. In my case, as you mentioned, Conrad, the last large acquisition I've been participating was the acquisition by Schneider Electric of Invensys, a large British engineering platform. And I will talk about this later on across the full hour. But one thing that I want to mention is we probably were totally lost without data processing. There was no way for us to properly understand customer, partner situations. And again, I will talk about all these things later on. Another important point was all the dependencies we had. Being a leader in marketing and branding, as a function, we had so many dependencies with all the other company functions, and there was no way to handle all those dependencies without a software tool, a digital tool that could help us to automate, but also to control time after time all the stops and problems and roadblocks we had with the different departments. So these are just some of the examples. And I will say one more time, all the central stages of the M&A definitely can benefit from new digital technologies.
I'm on mute, you know. Yeah, I was just saying thank you very much, Giuseppe, for sharing your wisdom with us. Which and I look forward to the more depth examples later on. And this gets us, Galena, this is a perfect move now into our next question that I would like to start with you. In which phases of a transaction, from target identification throughout post-merger integration, have you seen digital making the most sense to be applied? Certainly we heard it's up and running everywhere, but where does it make most sense from your personal experience and perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as a general comment I'll make is people kind of always talk about, you know, the continuity throughout the life cycle of the entire acquisition process, right? Starting with, you know, strategy development and deal identification, building the pipeline, and so on and so forth, all the way into post-merger integration. One of the biggest attributes, I think, of success is as much continuity that you have between the different phases, the better, right? Whether it's from a team standpoint, so having the integration specialist involved early in due diligence, or having due diligence team then become project management teams within the functional areas in the post-close activities. All of those things to me have always been big contributors to successful integration programs, as opposed to you know, as opposed to the opposite. So I guess I would say the same comment I would make as it relates to digitization or digital tools that you can utilize to run your overall acquisition process. And I would say at the very least, you know, I would certainly start with running or developing a pipeline, evaluating your acquisition pipeline in the tool, and then as post LOI conversation, using the proper tool that has ability to have the continuity between due diligence, right? Even as a buyer, house all the you know, question answer conversations during due diligence, house the documents perhaps that you want to be sure that they are available to you post close, having those be transitioned then post close and become available, and now they can all be dropped into specific functional areas. And again, let's hope that there was a continuity between the team as well. They should be very familiar with those documents. They should be familiar with those risks and issues that have been identified during due diligence, and they now become my issues or our issues during integration. And something that we should make sure that people are incorporating into their work plan to address, because I do see that happens quite a bit. If there's different teams and different tools that are being used between due diligence and post-merger integration, all of a sudden, you know, we kind of forget about the things we've identified in due diligence, right? And so those things are going to come to bite us in the end. So those are, I would say, as early as possible and as much continuity as possible. I would suggest looking for a tool or set of tools that are that provide you kind of the whole breadth of products or modules within it that can take you from, you know, as early as you know, pipeline management all the way into post-close.
However, you see different tools, right, that are not connected, and this is probably still not existent.
You know, I've seen both. I mean, I've seen both, and I've been actually, you know, working with a tool that I like that actually has that continuity. And I think that's what we need to, you know, kind of continue to work and look for in product offerings. And I'd suggest, you know, the audience look for those types of tools that will give you the continuity rather than the disparity.
Yeah, it was, and thank you very much for that. It was actually interesting to hear that you talked about more the organizational setup with, you know, individuals taking, so the human touch, right? And we talk
Yes,
about it later on a little more. So technology cannot cover all of it, right? So it needs to be kind of a human digital approach, and ideally a consistent one throughout all of the process steps. So Giuseppe, any further insights from you on this matter?
I definitely agree with Galena. Humans will drive anyway the full process. At the same time, I have to say that based on my experience, digital tools have been game-changing. If I think about one more time, the biggest acquisition I was involved with, which is the one with Schneider and Invensys, it was a matter of two companies with 180,000 people one side and 20,000 people on the other side, more than 100 countries involved, different kind of customers, partners, different level of partners. It will definitely be impossible for us, especially from a branding and communication standpoint, to handle all this data, all these activities without proper tools. And I think we were lucky enough to have a SaaS tool at that point that was used across the full M&A journey. It was not super sophisticated, quite frankly, but it was anyway a tool that helped all of us to have a common view about customer communication, revenue, and so on and so forth. I told you, Conrad, just a few minutes before about the dependencies. That was a big trouble we had, of course, because we as a external and internal communication team, we had to handle many different connection and collaborations with all the departments, and there was no other way, of course, to manage this without those digital tools. But I will also focus on the communication side, because the full plan, day 0, the launch, and then day 100 and 1 year, the integration was more or less between 12 and 18 months long. We couldn't do all things without some kind of management tool for communication. One more time, there were too many stakeholders involved at the same time, not necessarily internal, but also external. So from a post-merger integration standpoint, I think the use of digital tools is critical. One more time, it was handled and managed by us, humans. It was a mixed team of people coming from both sides, so the company acquiring and the company being acquired, and that was a perfect combination, in my opinion, because we had a complete view about all the things happening on the two different sides. But one more time, two different companies at the time. Of course, COVID was not there, so it was easy to travel. But at the same time, people were scattered all around. So having this tool was super critical from a large enterprise integration standpoint.
Was it kind of managed as we would call it today, a SharePoint, a database where all of the communication, strategy, like actions, roadmaps, etc., have been made available? Or did you use this tool also from a program management? And this is what I was hearing, more from a project management, getting things done perspective.
That was the second option. It was a specific software tool created for managing M&A. It was not, a consumer tool like SharePoint. So it was probably based on, general technologies, but it was a SaaS specifically created for M&A. Yeah.
So now this,
Conrad, that triggers one thinking. Thanks, Giuseppe, because I was being reminded of the past. When you look pre-signing, right, you typically have a range of advisors, tax advisors, financial advisors, technology advisors, strategy advisors, product advisors, whatever. They all bring together, whether a strategic advisor, a strategic investor, or financial investor would like to bid, or is increasing the bid, lowering the bid. And when I started my role of basically getting introduced in the whole M&A world, we were doing all of this via Excels and emails and other, sort of basic electronic things. And SaaS really, so software as a service really made a difference, because you can bring externals, like a range of different externals coming from different organizations, onto one platform, and then collaboration, file exchange, evaluation, discussions, that all becomes quite seamless if you compare it to what we did 5-7 years back. Yeah, so not only within an organization like Giuseppe was describing it, but also if we're talking cross-organization in M&A deals that typically appear pre-signing, that made really a difference. Yeah? And I can only encourage everyone listening to this that you look into some sort of software as a service sort of collaboration and exchange, as well as valuation toolings. Yeah.
And
Excellent.
I was going to add too is, Galena, how you were saying, having something that kind of goes across, because it also really pushes you to do the best in class process. Because oftentimes when you're going in and you're doing your acquisition, you also don't know what you don't know. And you also don't know how to toss that over to the integration team. And when you really kind of connect the diligence to the integration, you're all in one thing. You're also just forcing that data and information to be used and accessed, and to influence really what that integration strategy is and how you really want to look at the value drivers, and continue essentially just achieving what it is you said you wanted to do. So.
Thank you, Vicky. It makes a lot of sense. So Galena, let's talk about M&A playbooks. Organizations did over the last probably 10 years or a little bit longer. Many did, as far as I'm aware, come up with an M&A playbook, right? Describing, a governance, roles and responsibilities, and how the organization would typically work on transactions. Have you seen those playbooks being adapted, altered to also reflect what has been discussed as to where and how technology shall play a role in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And more I see the kind of a trend of companies, even large corporations, Fortune 500, others like that, are looking to bring their integration management or M&A management activities in-house. And many of them are looking to actually develop a playbook internally that they can then deploy on all transactions and make it generic enough where you can then customize it to a specifics of a particular transaction, or based on complexity and size or team availability and things like that. I actually have several engagements right now where my role is just to stand up the playbook, develop that, and then they at the moment the companies don't even have a particular transaction in mind yet, but we're looking to help them stand that up. And these program management tools that we've kind of been describing are a good place to house those playbooks. And they, so presumably those playbooks could include in them, to your point, governance structure, how teams are organized, but also very specific functional work plans and IMO work plans, day one preparation, checklists and things like that. All of those things can kind of reside in a playbook form, and a kind of more generic type of form within a tool. And then they can just get pulled down every time there's an actual transaction that's taking place, that we would want to kind of just customize to with specific names, dates, activities and things like that. So yes, absolutely. Playbooks is kind of a big deal from what I'm seeing these days, and more I'm seeing companies want to just develop that internal capability to do things on their own using these playbooks.
Yeah, and the role of digital, and in particular, I'm thinking about the platforms, the platform you did mention beforehand. Would organizations actually kind of state in there, you shall use this and that platform, or how do you see this happening? Because there is certainly multiple super good providers out there,
Yeah.
and better ones and not so good ones. Does procurement play a role in there, or what have you seen? I'm personally curious, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I've seen it done both ways. I at times as a service bring kind of my instance of a tool with me, and in a recent engagement, actually, as I shared kind of the tool and how I use it, and I've used them in the past, the company has decided to go directly and contract with the provider directly, and that was a great outcome for them, and they made kind of the commercial decision to do that, and made sense for them, and now they're going to be utilizing them, and to your point, that procurement got involved and developed a relationship now with the provider of this company, of this supplier directly. So
it's I'm thinking I have a corporate background as well as a consulting background. I certainly love if procurement contracts with us. On the other hand side, from a corporate perspective, it's probably good to be flexible. This is what we all are accustomed to. But at the same time, the provider and the contractor, they can grow together, which is actually also quite good. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's actually. Well, thank you very much for that, Dominic. I know that you have a strong opinion on that as well.
Well, yes, I do. I mean, I was just thinking through when it comes to the M&A books or playbooks, as you refer to them, and what happened over the last 2 years, I would say, because clients that we have developed those playbooks with, they basically came back and said, like, with all these digital technologies, I mean, we have done that together with yourself, but also amended it with other consulting companies or with internal staff. But what do we need to change? Do we need to adjust certain things? And I was quite astonished over the last 2 years that almost, I would say, 80% of the clients that I've developed playbooks with, they all came back and said, like, what's your view on how should we basically infuse the new capabilities that those technologies are bringing into those playbooks? And what it typically does is that a lot of the processes, when we were then going through that with our clients, a lot of those processes are basically getting highly standardized when tools are being applied. Yeah, but that also brings, and I think Vicky had that a bit, the organizational part of it. It then also brings organizational behavior adjustments or organizational change, right, to some extent. And I think that's a broader conversation that would, the time would not be enough in this group. But also in M&A, we see that if we just apply, standardization through technology in M&A processes, that organizational change also needs to be picked up, because the M&A teams, but also the customers of those M&A teams, they just need to here and there adjust to the standardization. Because yes, tooling can help, but tooling also requires standardization. To Giuseppe's point, at the end of the day, it's human and machines together, right? You can standardize, but there will always be, some sort of custom elements to it that we as humans then obviously pick up. Yeah, but it's certainly something where both things are also coming much more together. Yeah.
Together. Well, thank you very much.
I was going to jump in to say too, is I feel like it really has become, the playbooks have shifted to be, Dominic, to your point, it's the guidepost for what you need to do. And especially when they're taking it more internal, we're hearing a lot of companies, and especially if you're a serial acquirer, you don't want to keep paying for the consultants. So they want to do it more in-house. It really also becomes sort of that basic training guide for them. And, the tool itself is what they're going to use, but there's still that necessity of how am I supposed to go through this process? What does it mean? And what are some of the basic one-on-ones of the process? The other thing too that, I think we've all seen is a playbook is only useful if you've got that right support, and whether it's a center of excellence or someone who is, the person held accountable, corp dev or an integration office, whatever that may be, because it's only as good as as you use it and kind of enhance it. If you keep it stagnant, there's really no point to it, because it's going to be ever changing. And especially I think with the conversation we're having with the technology, the digitization, I think there's always going to be some type of adjustment to ensure that you've got efficiency and your process really is kind of evolving with that.
Yeah. The processes always at the beginning look very nice, and when you really start to transfer a process to digital, to digitize it, it looks completely different in the end, right? So
yes,
absolutely. And now we got a question, and the question I kind of expected to come, and thank you, Maladi, for asking this question. Could you share any specific examples of tools that you find especially helpful? My recommendation is not to name providers here, but more what should we look for when we search for specific providers, right? Good providers in the early stage or in a later stage of the deal. Yeah. So probably Galena, Dominic, do you have any kind of recommendations at hand?
Galena, you want to start?
Yes, I was just trying to unmute. Absolutely. So I guess first and foremost, I'll say kind of this, what I already mentioned, the concept of continuity, right? And the tool that is the most comprehensive is probably something you want to look for that takes you from basically throughout the entirety of the life cycle of an M&A transaction. The other thing I would look for is the support team, right? That the software developer team that is responsive, that kind of has this yes, we can attitude. I'm working with one that is absolutely wonderful, and I am rarely, hear the answer is no, we can't do that. And it's largely kind of like, oh, how can we do that, right? And taking, I'm kind of becoming super user myself in this particular tool. And so therefore I'm able to kind of give them some feedback, and they take that feedback and they have a loop that they incorporate kind of a client or customer feedback in, and see how they can develop that into their next release perhaps, or next upgrade. Because I'm living real examples of real situations, and they are super excited to get my feedback, and I think that's helping them with further developing and improving their product. So I would say that would be a super important thing for me is to have that really great rapport with the development team, where they are they're there to support anything and everything that I need, and they're available, right? I don't have to wait like 4 days to get them on the line. And at times there's situations with clients where, or within, the company where it's like, okay, we need an answer right now. We need to print a dashboard right now. We need to do something, and something's not working. And I know that I can send in a kind of a help please, message, and somebody immediately will be on the line with me. And so those are kind of two main things. I'm sure there's others, but I would say that I look for in a provider.
Excellent. Yeah. I think this covers it. Dominic, do you want to?
Yeah, amending on what Galena said, I always look at this without naming vendors, but I always look at it phase by phase, right? One thing that I personally, but also our teams are heavily using if we support clients, there are basically target screening toolings, where they basically have automated crawling engines that make use of various data sources and basically come up with long lists that then get been reduced to short lists by the deal teams. So target screening automation is certainly something I would plug into Google, and there will certainly come a couple of vendors as a search result. In due diligence, I do think that a lot of sort of technical tools, I'm obviously, as I said, I'm running our tech M&A practice, so my focus is solely on the technology side of an M&A transaction, and also evaluating whether there is some debt, technologically debt in an asset. And there I make a lot of use of code qualifiers or network sniffers, so very technology specific toolings, but very tools that you can just implement quite simplistic into the environment, and then that basically automatically gives you an understanding in the due diligence phase that deal teams then can refer to or defer into their investment hypotheses. Yeah? And when we look post closing, I do think that post closing, again from a technology point of view, you should look at the next level of post-merger integration toolboxes that Giuseppe also referred to, because they have, I think, made a quite significant step up, not only moving to software as a service, as a deployment option, but also in the way they now offer a decent level of automation and very, very standardized processes. So that would be my, three-folded answer linked to the different phases of an M&A transaction. Yeah.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, Galena and Dominic. That framed it very nicely what to look for. So without mentioning any providers here. So no marketing spiel. No, thank you so much. And Dominic, you talked about investment hypothesis beforehand. You mentioned that. Have you seen differences in terms of valuation and cost models for deals where digital has been really broadly applied in the early phases?
Yeah. I have seen it as how we derive as deal teams, the input into those investment models has changed to a certain degree. And I mentioned that a bit earlier, right? The sheer volume of data that are being put into data rooms, and I'm on both sides, right? I'm filling a data room and analyzing a data room. Sometimes you choose to put a lot of data in because it just differs the whole information set across. Yeah, sometimes you put less in. It's all deal strategies. But what certainly has helped and has changed from my personal perspective, but happy for the rest to chip in, is that we are applying sort of AI-driven toolings and crawling mechanisms that are going through the VDR, analyzing certain data elements via text analysis, and then derive deal hypotheses or investment hypotheses out of what those tools are gathering. Right? You don't know how they do it typically, unless you are a programmer of those. But what it does is it changes a bit the way we as deal teams work, because we get a list of deal hypotheses, we get a priority ranking of what the tooling or what the digital technology refers to more important documents for the deal or less important documents. So it helps us humans to basically prioritize, to basically find the right deal hypothesis, but also gives us a first set of deal investment hypotheses that we as deal teams then can review and certainly also challenge. Right? You should never, I think another personal advice, you should never just pass it through, because it needs to have a human lens on it at the very end. To Giuseppe's point, I think. But it can certainly help a lot, especially when data is getting more and more and more. And how do you, and these tools are basically helping you to transfer data into information.
Yeah. Okay. So that means that digital, to summarize, digital is used actually to form a kind of transaction hypothesis, evaluation, etc. It's not left out and just a human responsibility, but it's actually pretty much used as far as I understand. Yeah.
Yes.
And Giuseppe, this gets me to the question around the tendency to digitize, to fully digitize parts of the M&A process, right? Without Dominic reviewing all of what the company internally is doing. I don't know what you are exactly doing, but that sounds really great. But Giuseppe, could you see that parts of the M&A process are organized by digital, living without human, right? A human element in it.
Well, Conrad, unfortunately, I have to say no, meaning that we already mentioned several times that, I mean, this is a tendency. This is accelerated by COVID, by the way, and but still the human element is critical. And I will give you one example, which is also related to data management, still related to the large acquisition I was mentioning before. I was responsible for communication and branding, as I already mentioned, and we decided to centralize the full communication. It was much easier to control everything, in an environment with 100 countries and several stakeholders. Of course, I mean, the idea was to make things simple, right? The simpler they are, the faster they will go. The reality was a bit different, unfortunately, because at a certain point, we discovered that in some countries, in some regions, clients, or older clients, major clients and accounts decided to stop buying from us. So they pause purchasing. And by the way, we are talking about B2B goods, several million systems in some cases. And of course, we realized that there was a problem thanks to data integration between sales and marketing. At that point, of course, we stopped for a moment and we said, okay, what's going on? And we discovered that it was mostly uncertainty about products and solutions and the future and investment and so on and so forth. At that point, we decided to go with the segmented audience and to completely go with a different kind of communication for these customers. And you can imagine the lever here was, don't worry, together we will be better and bigger, and we are not stopping investments and so on and so forth, while in general terms the communication was a bit different. So this is just an example of how the human side was critical to understand, to get insights from data. Without data, of course, there was no probably from our side understanding about the situation, but at the same time insights came from us. A final point about COVID. I know that it was mentioned several times. I mean, it's undeniable that this is accelerating the adoption of digital, and I'm not necessarily talking about M&A. I'm talking about all fields, and I see this every single day in marketing, and I work in MarTech. So things that were probably supposed, to happen in 10 years, they're happening now after 10, 12 months. Which is not a bad thing, by the way. I mean, it's probably one of the few positive outcome of this crisis, this pandemic. This will definitely help going with maybe in the future with hybrid models, who knows? But still, the acceleration has been dramatic in the last few months, and I don't think, after enjoying, this kind of technological advance, we will decide suddenly to stop everything. I mean, think about due diligence and virtual pre-deal meetings, and everything now is virtual, right? Virtual meetings have been used heavily in M&A process as well, and then it depends on the kind of sector the M&A is in. I mean, if you're talking about technology sector, probably virtual is fine, and we can complete everything on a virtual environment. If we if we think about industrial environment, well, you probably need some kind of physical mobility, to understand physically the locations and so on and so forth. I think this is definitely an interesting point. Regardless the limitations that may be still valid in some sectors, this acceleration will not just go away.
And it's industry, this is my key learning, it's industry specific, right? If you look at the tech industry, no worries. You get a lot of, you get access to people who are accustomed to deal with technology and also with the related tools to be applied in this and that context. But if you work on the manufacturing in a manufacturing industry, shop floor, it's going to be difficult. Thank you very much, Giuseppe, for the deeper dive here. Galena, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll just mention a couple of just very practical things. I think we talked a lot about the project management tool already. Two other things that obviously have gotten digitized, and some of it is thanks to COVID. Typically as part of an integration program, you would run a workshop. Right. And all of a sudden, because of COVID, we were not allowed to gather together in large groups. And I would have never in a million years have allowed to have a workshop related to an integration program to be virtual or not in person. Right. Obviously, there's a lot that you get from being together in the same room. The companies that are merging have their teams there, and that's their first entree into collaboration with each other and learning the cultures and things like that, having kind of formal meetings and then having some informal meetings in the evenings and bowling and other events that you'd want to do. But all of a sudden, all of that got kind of halted. And so we're now having to do these workshops on Zoom. So I will tell you that all of a sudden I have developed a really great capability to run workshops on Zoom. And so what I've done is what I found, there's actually a new profession out there that's called Zoom Facilitator. And I hire a small firm that basically helps me running the if let's say we have at any point in time on a workshop, it could be as many as 60 people, and at some point during the workshop we need to separate them all into breakout rooms, and then we also facilitate something called an interdependency session where everybody gets to move around and speak to another, all the different functions, and almost like a speed dating environment. I have a facilitator that handles kind of the back office or the kind of the background technology so that I can focus on the content of what's going on. So that's all of a sudden become a really, really great thing. And it's gone really well. And the outcomes of this, I've done this now 3 or 4 times, during COVID, and that's actually really worked very well. Obviously, you cut a lot of cost out with people not having to travel, and ability to kind of bring people in and out as needed. So there's a lot of positives. Certainly, there's the negative aspect of missing out on some of the personal relationships that could be building and things like that. So that's definitely there. And I don't know. I mean, the answer, if anybody asks me, would you move back to going, personal workshop? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I'd have to give it a lot of thought. Once we can all get back together in person, I couldn't even tell you right this minute if I'd want to go back to personal. So that's one thing. And the other thing I'd mentioned is that we started to digitize is some of our aspect of our communication. Kind of around day one and communication with the acquired employees. So we've started to typically we would provide something like a welcome letter with some FAQs and things like that. We started to develop something we call a microsite, where all of the kind of pertinent things related to day one impact on the acquired employees would be listed there. There would be a lot of different areas where they can go into and learn about the company that they're about to join or they just joined, learning what's changing for them, what's not changing, learning the tools that are now available to them, benefits, whatever else that we want to communicate. It will be a link that will be provided in the welcome letter. And then they go into this microsite, and now they have ability to kind of browse around and see what's important to them. And another key feature of that is that it's it's a dynamic tool, right? It's not a set document that you can't change. You obviously can upload new information as things change, as we share more. At times we stagger some of the things we want to share as to not overwhelm people on day one with too much information. So we kind of continue to add new information into the microsite and letting them know that things have changed. So there's other things that I think that have gone digital that I feel like have improved the overall aspect of integration program.
Galena, just a question. The offer letter process, and particularly in the US, is that also managed via this platform, followed by the onboarding?
We recently had a situation where we had to offer offer employment basically to all the acquired individuals, and we did this in person. I feel like that is the one thing that I would suggest. Again, it all depends too on the size, right? It was not a huge number of employees, and we deployed our HR individuals, and I felt that this was more of a one-on-one type of a conversation that should be handled human to human. But that's, that was in this particular case. And again, if we had thousands of employees, we might have handled it different.
Yeah. No, this is then this is where technology probably might come into play, or should come into play, because it's not doable. No, this is really a great experience. I was reminded of the movie Up in the Air, George Clooney, but you have done the opposite, right?
That's right. That's right.
Rather than offering employment, he was kind of stopping it in a way. No, that's great. So again, we are already moving into PMI and also towards the last question. Here we are in PMI, synergy realization during the integration phase. We heard about the onboarding, which is, I know from one of the big giant organizations in the US, they failed with this, and they said you only have one chance on day one, right? Otherwise, the chances are gone. And probably you heard this, Dominic, this quote as well. So again, which kind of other technology are you seeing deployed in the, let's put it that way, value creation phase of a transaction? Vicky, I think you have some good stories about that.
I will say it's in kind of keeping with just the overall tool itself. Identifying that tool that has that concept embedded in with the synergy is certainly one where it's very key. And what I'm seeing too is by having this digitized and kind of creating this consistent, let's say, reporting out of the system, kind of getting the information, it continues to keep it in the forefront, because ultimately, yes, the human is the one that's going to drive it. And sadly, a lot of the things that I've seen, it kind of just dies off after, let's say, 90 days. Nobody really looks at the synergy numbers as much or drives towards it. And so with some of these tools too, it is kind of continuing to push that aspect, which is really great. The other piece too, and it's kind of what I touched on in the beginning, and kind of going into your point with having that link to provide a lot of the information to the acquired employees and stuff. I'm finding you're able to drive a little bit more value and kind of that touch point, and especially in more of this hybrid or remote environment, which is really going to help as well with kind of how do you achieve, the synergies. You've got sort of easier ways to make those touch points. It's no longer, hey, you always have to be in person per se, but you're kind of driving more how important it is to now be digital. and using those touch points. And, I see too with some of the clients that we have where they might be more, let's say, traditional industries. So let's say manufacturing, and they're making an acquisition into a more technology or innovative company. Certainly seeing, companies out there who've made these acquisitions and they've lost the value. It's kind of become a negative value to them because they haven't really considered sort of that cultural piece, the differences, and not saying because you digitize, you're going to win them over. There's still the human element of how do you address that from a cultural perspective. But there's certainly those aspects too, where you're trying to meet to that innovative level as well. And how do you kind of bring that all together? So there's certainly some aspects there where it really is helping from a technology perspective. And again, Giuseppe hit it on the spot way in the beginning of regardless of all the technology, it's still that human, it's still that ability to drive it. It's still that person who, or not even the person, but the company that holds accountability for doing this acquisition and making sure that value is met.
So I'm hearing you are bringing up next to the people side, mentioned by Galena, also the finance side, right? You need to make sure that the tracking and the let's say discipline to actually see the value creation by looking at either top line growth, cost savings, bottom line improvements, etc. Right? That's another dimension. Dominic, any final, conclusions on your end on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, linking to your point, Konrad, top line and bottom line improvements, I think one element post closing that I see more and more being very, very important also from a synergy perspective is actually cloudified infrastructure, because it sort of gives you a lot of agility that you do require after a transaction is being, signed off and in execution, because it allows you to deploy, different applications, different processes, much faster than before, and that typically drives a lot of synergies. Yeah, but it also drives top line and bottom line improvements. Yeah. So therefore, cloudified infrastructure, I think that's also something that should stick with the audience here. That this should be embedded in a transaction post-sign.
Brilliant. We got to 3 key drivers, right?
Yeah.
So, no, thank you for the super good discussion. I hope that was helpful to you guys who are still with us on the call, who actually kind of have shown endurance, right, and still with us. So thank you, Galena. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Giuseppe, and also in your direction, Dominic, for the great panel. And Dharmendra, thank you inviting us to this wonderful panel. And I cannot see any further questions in the Q&A. We covered them already automatically, guys. That's very good. So with this, thank you very much. And back to you, Yoshi.
So that was a really interesting discussion. Thanks to Konrad for moderating. Also, a big thank you to Dominic, Galena, Giuseppe, Vicky, and Dharmendra for the thoughtful discussion. I'm sure that this leaves us with an appetite for more. A special thank you to our audience for attending today's event. We hope that you found the M&A Summit 2021 informational and insightful, and found value in hearing from such a diverse set of industry experts and deal makers from all around the world. Also, as Galena mentioned, though we miss having face-to-face conferences and summits, I think these virtual summits are also a great way for us to connect, given the present pandemic situation. We also hope that all of us are in a better place and can safely meet in person for the next year's M&A Summit as it gets bigger and better. So again, thanks everyone, including our guest speakers and audiences, for attending the virtual M&A Summit 2021, and have a good day ahead.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.